Hello everybody and welcome to another Twilight Zone retro review. Today it is Season 1 Episode 11 and When the Sky Was Opened, an episode written by Rod Serling and starring Rod Taylor as Colonel Forbes, Jim Hutton as Major Gart, and Charles Aidman as Colonel Harrington. And the premise of this episode is basically that a group of astronauts crash land their ship back onto Earth. And there's a little bit more to it than that, as you'll see. So what we do is we start in the hospital where Rod Taylor's character, Colonel Forbes, comes in to visit his friend who's still in the hospital with, I don't know if he broke his leg or if his leg's just hurt or whatever, but it is Major Gart. And he's very freaked out about something, but we're not sure what it is yet. Well, it turns out that Colonel Forbes says that 3 of them came back from the trip, but Major Gart and everyone else seems to remember only 2 of them, like the 3rd man, Colonel Ed Harrington, didn't exist. And they show the newspaper, and that only shows 2 men coming back. And basically, we're not really sure what to make of this. So then we actually, as Forbes pleads his case, we actually go back in time to the night before, and I personally thought this was a great technique to film the episode not non-linear, where we start in the present and then go back in time, because now we see Ed Harrington and we really know that, at least in Forbes' mind, there were 3 people, and in reality it looks like there were 3 people, and it really makes us more interested into what happened. So the 2 of them are in the bar, Forbes and Harrington, and basically what happens is after a few minutes in the bar, Harrington says he's not feeling well, and he says he'll be back in a minute. He's going to go make a phone call to home. Well, what happens from here is it's been a while, so Forbes goes to check on Harrington, and Harrington's freaking out in the phone booth. And he's saying that he called his parents and they don't know who he is, that they have no son named Ed Harrington. So what's really interesting about this is that it seems like other people don't remember him either. Well, a few minutes later, he actually does disappear. So now we know what happened to him. But what's interesting about this is that Forbes still remembers him. So we go back to the hospital, and basically we go to Forbes' home next. I'm sorry, not the hospital. I think it's his home, and he talks to a woman named Amy, who I'm assuming he's connected with romantically. I'm not sure, they don't really say, but he tells her about his story, and she doesn't remember Ed Harrington either. So he calls up one of the leaders from the space program. They don't remember Harrington either. At this point, he's pretty much completely freaking out over everything. And then after he goes back to the bar and nobody's there, we cut back to the hospital where, Gart seems sympathetic to his case, but he insists that there's no Ed Harrington. He says he doesn't remember him, and maybe Forbes needs help. He says maybe he's an illusion. But then Forbes says, he's not an illusion. He was yanked out of here. He said something was wrong. He was just yanked out of here. Well, at this point, Forbes really loses it, and he disappears. So now what we basically get is the same thing. Now Gart, it says, is the only surviving astronaut. It shows on the paper that he's the only one, and it's like Forbes and Harrington both were yanked out of existence, and neither one exists anymore. So now Gart, all of a sudden, is remembering Forbes, and nobody else is. And then basically what happens is that when Gart's all alone, he freaks, and the next scene we see is a doctor and a nurse, and Gart has also disappeared. So they're all gone. And we get Rod Serling's narration, and basically what we get is that the spacecraft they were on has also disappeared. So it's like, did these things never exist? Are they in some kind of parallel universe? Were they somehow spirits and they didn't survive the crash? What really happened? Well, the thing about this episode, and in my opinion, what actually makes it great, is that it's never really explained what happens. They're just gone. Now, you can also call this a major flaw in the episode if you're someone who feels that an explanation is needed, because there really isn't one. To me, this episode totally worked. It's very compelling. It brings up some interesting things about people, especially fear of the unknown, which is probably the greatest fear that a lot of people had. There's also a lecture that you can listen to about this episode, and I'm not going to analyze the whole thing. I did listen to it, but Rod Serling talks about how there's a lot of different kinds of fear, but he feels that the worst is fear of the unknown, because you don't know what's going to happen. And he felt that the strangeness of the premise worked without an explanation, that you still felt for the characters. And I totally agree with them. And you also have to remember that this episode was made at a time where we didn't know as much about outer space as we do now. So the premise actually works even a little better, because we don't know what would happen to people or what the effect would be in space, which, we know a lot more scientifically now than we did then. So I really thought this was one of the best episodes to this point, and I'm going to give it a 4.5 out of 5, 4.5 out of 5. If somehow they could have come up with some great explanation for this, I might have gone all the way with it. But I'm gonna give it a 4.5 out of 5, and I think it's definitely worth watching. It's a very thought-provoking episode, whether or not it provides answers. So, thanks for watching.